You are in the ladies' room with Dr. Donica, the only public ladies' room you can enter anytime without ever waiting online. I'm your host, Dr. Donica Moore. We'll be having real conversations with real women about really intimate issues. They may be embarrassing, sad, or funny, but they will always be interesting and informative. You know, like the best conversations you've had in ladies' rooms with your best friends, or total strangers and a physician. Please join us. Welcome to the ladies' room. Today we have another taboo topic. And we've talked about many taboo topics here in the ladies' room because that's what we do. We've talked about masturbation to menopause and bowel movements to the Me Too movement. But today we're going to discuss a very sensitive topic for too many people, and that's the topic of domestic violence. Unfortunately, both my guest and I have way too much personal experience in this arena, but we're both willing to share our stories in the hopes that if it helps even one other person, it will have been worthwhile. Now, I first heard our guest story on the podcast Taboo Tales. She wrote an incredible essay with humor, grit, and the entire range of emotions, which I highly recommend to you if you want to hear even more from Chris after our discussion. But before I introduce our guest, I want to tell you some shocking facts about domestic violence, both how prevalent it is, how pervasive, how pernicious, and how extensive its social and medical impact is. And if all that doesn't impress you, I'm also going to talk to you about how much it costs our society in terms of dollars. So first, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. During 1 year, this comes out to be more than 10 million women and men. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have been victims of some kind of physical violence by an intimate partner in their lifetime. My guest was one of them. 1 in 7 women and 1 in 18 men have been stalked by an intimate partner during their lifetime to the point where they felt very fearful or believed that they or someone close to them would be harmed or killed. And that's not exaggerating. On a typical day, there are more than 20,000 phone calls placed to domestic violence hotlines nationwide. We've talked a lot this week about the presence of guns in our society and the pervasiveness of gun violence. But the presence of a gun, or more than one gun, in a domestic violence situation increases the risk of homicide by 500%. Intimate partner violence accounts for 15% of all violent crime. And women between the ages of 18 to 24 are most commonly abused by an intimate partner. 19% of domestic violence involves a weapon. So that's 1 in 5 cases. Domestic victimization is correlated with a higher rate of depression and suicidal behavior. Only a third of people who are injured by intimate partners ever receive any medical care for their injuries, for one of many reasons, but mostly because of fear. A study of intimate partner homicides found that 20% of victims, 1 in 5, were not the intimate partners themselves, but family members, friends, neighbors, first responders, or even bystanders. And we, of course, heard about this situation in one of the most famous cases or infamous cases involving Jennifer Hudson's relatives. 72% of all murder-suicides involve an intimate partner. 94% of those victims are female. 1 in 15 children are exposed to intimate partner violence each year, and I was one of them. And 90% of these children are eyewitnesses to this violence. I was one of them as well, and so were my 5 siblings. Victims of intimate partner violence lose a total of 8 million days of paid work per year. So if we do the math, the cost of intimate partner violence exceeds $8.3 billion per year. Between 20 and 60% of victims of intimate violence lose their jobs due to some kind of reason stemming from the abuse. I could go on and on with all of these statistics, but to summarize, women are more likely to be murdered in the workplace by their abuser, as well as killed in their homes. They're more vulnerable to contracting HIV or other sexually transmitted infections due to rape, forced intercourse, or prolonged exposure to stressors, or not getting medical care. Our guest, Krishelle Ochner, has worked in the childbirth arena for nearly 20 years, helping women in labor as a birth doula and breastfeeding educator. I would much rather be talking to her about all of those subjects, and we'll get to that at the end, knowing us. She taught childbirth education, breastfeeding classes, car seat safety, as well as infant CPR for over 10 years. She worked on an ambulance in Los Angeles as an EMT, she says, to feed her adrenaline habit. And she personally has given birth both at home and in a hospital setting, so she can relate to both with a personal perspective. She has a unique approach and vision to the transition from pregnancy to parenthood. She talks about pregnancy hacking. So she talks about sleep, sex, and getting your body back after babies. And that's what she now teaches to expecting and new parents. You will not believe what a positive person she is, especially when you hear her story. Anyway, Krishelle, welcome to the ladies' room, and thank you so much for coming.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Donica, for having me on.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And when we first planned this, I wanted to talk to you about baby hacking or post-baby hacking. And I wanted to talk to you about pregnancy and nursing and getting sleep after after having a baby, getting back to having a sexual relationship with your partner, all that good stuff. And we got to talking, and we just talked and talked and talked and talked. And you told me your story about your previous life experience and your previous relationship experience. And I had been looking for somebody who was willing to come talk to us about domestic violence from the been there, done that perspective. There's plenty of psychiatrists or gynecologists I could have had come talk about it from a provider perspective. And it's pretty gruesome. And I've been on both sides. I haven't been in an intimate partner violence situation where I was the partner, but where I was the child. And I heard the statistic about 15 million children a year being exposed to domestic violence. And I think something just clicked in my mind. And I said, I need to use my voice and this platform to discuss this issue. So thank you for pairing with me to do that. And without further ado, please tell us your personal story.
Well, it's interesting when you started, I guess, even to this day, I still don't put all the pieces together all the time. But when you mention about like the children of violence witnessing it and then going on to be abusers or abused, I was raised in a very violent home after my parents were divorced and my mom remarried to a horrific alcoholic. He didn't hurt us, but there was plenty of times he would backhand her at the kitchen table and knock her off her chair, and the whole dinner would go flying. And I remember at a different house that we had moved to, I was 14. This is a 6'4" construction worker guy that's buff and strong. And I literally got between him and my mom, and I said, over my dead body. And the neighbors were called, he's been to jail, and she divorced him and remarried him again.
Oh my God.
So that's probably where it really started for me, because my real father was a very kind and gentle soul. Like, he was so kind. But yeah, then, there's a lot of, the story I'm going to talk about, of course, is with my kids' father, but there was a lot of stalking and dating and, just like, I just wasn't raised right. The wiring's off, or maybe it just felt comfortable or it felt like home, even though it didn't feel good.
So what you're doing right now is the same thing so many victims of domestic violence or intimate partner violence do. You're still trying to figure out what you did wrong. You're still trying
to figure out why I didn't make better choices with men, because even after I got out of the divorce, I was stalked by 2 or 3 different people that were normal people. One was a fireman that broke into my house through a kitchen window. I mean, now, I think I figured it out. Like, I just, I don't allow any red flags in my life. And it takes some time to really heal from coming through a 10-year marriage like that. And then seeing in dating, like, okay, this is happening again. And so I actually went and saw a therapist, and I said, I know all these normal men are kind of going crazy on me, but I'm the common denominator, and I accept that fact that I'm somehow allowing this back into my life, instead of saying, putting up your boundaries and saying, you can't cross this line. If you cross this line, I'm no longer going to see you. And it's really kind of finding your strength and your power in that those kind of moments to recognize this isn't healthy behavior and what you're doing is not acceptable. Like I would tell that to a 2-year-old, you know, like your behavior is not acceptable, calm down or whatever. And I really had to just apply that to men in my life. And now I'm remarried to the most gentle of souls. He's just an amazing man. But
so
yeah,
you worked it out. And I think you said a couple of really important things. First of all, you sought help from a therapist. Right. So I think that's really important. And actually that's second of all. First of all, you got out.
Yes.
So I would love for you to tell us how you got in. And then, you know, what happened during the course of the relationship. And then most importantly for people who are listening, how you got out.
Yeah. How I got in was, we started dating and you
were how old?
Old enough to know better. I was 26, 7, right in there. And we started dating and he would do some like really bizarre things. Like I would get out of his car and he would lock the doors and he would grab my date planner and start reading through my calendars and see where I was and what phone numbers were written down in it. Like I had like one of those big planners from the 90s. And
the day timer.
Yeah.
I had a day timer and a Franklin planner.
Oh, it was a Franklin. That's what it was.
I loved the Franklin planner.
Yes. And just little things like that, you know, and I just excused it away. Like, oh, he's just really interested in me, or, you know, twisted up to some sort of, he cares about me. He loves me that much. Then he would go through my mail. We'd broken up and got back together. And for whatever reason, I just remember thinking like, I can make this work. There was no proposal. There was no big wedding. We literally he said, what weekend are you off? Well, I'm off work next weekend. And we drove out to Laughlin and got on a riverboat and got married with a bunch of drunk strangers. And it was literally just doing paperwork. And we went back home and went back to work. And within 3 days, he'd come home. He'd moved my stuff out of my condominium into his house with his cousin. And they'd found a piece of furniture that was signed by an old boyfriend. He was an artist and he'd made some furniture. Actually, the desk I'm sitting at, he made, but my ex-husband never knew that. Actually, he's the artist of those babies back there too.
Oh, wow.
He's very talented. And my ex-husband found out that this piece of furniture had been made by him, and he destroyed the house. He got unbelievably intoxicated and destroyed the home. I took my dog and moved back to the condo. And like so many situations like that, he came over with this big gift and all the right words and all the things you want to hear in those moments. And he was very charming that way and talked me back into coming back. Well, 2 weeks later, I was pregnant. So I then at that point was really, and was still thinking about leaving. I still had a great career. I was still making good money. I still had my Mercedes. I still had my condo. And then once the baby came, I found out I was pregnant, which I was told I would never get pregnant. So it was just like.
Why were you told you would never get pregnant?
Mm-hmm. A lot of pituitary issues, POCS, I believe it's called.
PCOS.
Yeah,
polycystic ovarian syndrome.
Mm-hmm. So
we'll talk about that in a future episode of this podcast. It's a common cause of infertility. But right. I wish I had $5 for every woman with PCOS who was told she would never get pregnant, who has a child.
I actually had 4 pregnancies. I had 2 miscarriages and 2 babies. So yeah, it's it's very possible. But all those years thinking it wasn't, and I had 1 miscarriage under my belt, I really just couldn't believe that I was pregnant and it was going to stick, and I was going to do everything I could to make sure I had that baby, and I did, and I stayed, and that's kind of why I stayed. And it gets more violent when you're pregnant. The shoving, the pushing, the yelling, the gaslighting, it all gets much worse.
And then, talk to me about the first time there was any physical abuse.
Well, I would say that 3 days after we got married, when he destroyed the house, he didn't touch me, but that was pretty violent. And that really let me know his strength and his power, and really intimidating. As far as like the first violence, it was just shoving. I remember being like 6, 7 months pretty pregnant, and I put on a lot of weight. I was pretty big at the time, so I was, off balance and whatnot. And I remember he just had taken me by the shoulders and shoved me onto the bed really violently. And I just didn't register. I look back now and I'm a completely different person. And I just kind of shake my head like that was such a big, they were all big red flags. And I stayed, and it didn't get too much more like physically worse than that. It was the financial abuse, the emotional abuse, the verbal abuse. I know he went a period of 9 months without saying he loved me, just to hurt me. So he withdrew some of the things that you want to hear, just to push your buttons. And then when Connor was 3 months old, he ended up in jail. We had a pretty violent confrontation.
He was put in jail because the police were called during a domestic incident. It
was right after the Nicole Simpson law had gotten passed. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't have, which is a great law, because I begged them, don't take him. It's going to make you mad. Or he's going
to tell for people who don't know, tell them what the Nicole Simpson law is.
So I had,
and is this federal or is this just in California?
I don't know. It's for sure California, but I don't know if it's a federal. Mm-hmm. I hope it is. I would imagine it is by now. But anytime you have any markings right, and I had hand digs, and he had shoved me into the steering wheel, so I had like a big mark on my shoulder. And I had secretly been going to domestic violence support groups during the week when he was at work. I was sneaking off to these groups when, if I hadn't gotten that, I probably never would have called 911, and who knows what would have happened. But
so the police came, and then for some reason you decided to beg them not to take him.
When it came down to him being handcuffed and hauled out, I was like freaking out, like, don't take, like, it's going to be so much worse when he comes back. You have no idea what I'm going to go through when he gets home. And the cop said to me, he goes, look, you've got a brand new baby. You've got a beautiful life ahead of you. He's got 3 days mandatory in jail. Get on a plane and get out of here.
And did you do that?
And I did. I took my golden retriever and my baby, and I got on a plane and I went home to Utah, and I was there for probably a good 6 weeks. And that's not a great place for me to be either, in that situation back home. So I really had to decide, can I do this on my own? Can I put this baby in daycare, or can I put up with the dad for 2 years till I think my son's old enough to go to daycare without like the guilt for me? And I decided that things were so not good back home that it was better off to come back to California and move back in with dad and just try and get through the next 2 years and just make my exit strategy and get out.
And so was he contacting you in the meantime and influencing that decision?
Yeah. And we were very religious at the time. And so the elders of the church were heavily involved.
So this is Church of Latter-day Saints?
No, it's Jehovah's Witness, actually.
Okay.
And he's a very charming person. The congregation we were in, he'd grown up in, so all these people knew him since he was little. And I remember one time, one of the elders just saying, I think you want attention. I think that's really why you keep coming to us. Like, no one believed me at all.
So you actually went to them and told them what was happening? Many
times. And they finally just said, you know what, this is just, you're seeking attention. And I'm like, wow. I really need help. And it's so like, you can't get divorced. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the only way you can get divorced is, like if, there's an affair, or I can't read, there's 2 reasons why you can get a divorce with them.
Probably infertility.
So, in the end, it got so bad. Getting divorced wasn't my goal. Getting out was my goal. I wasn't leaving to get divorced. I wasn't leaving to date or be with anyone else. I was literally leaving to save my life.
Now, interestingly, when you went back, you just talked about it was a binary choice in your mind. Right. In your mind at that time, the way you were looking at your options was you could either just stay in your mother's house, which was unacceptable for a number of reasons, or you could go back to this abuser.
Right.
Had you sold your condo at that point, or did you
It
still
was a
have it?
rental. I didn't own it. So
Okay.
by that point, yeah, of course it was. I mean, which I could have re-rented, but I didn't have money at that point.
Right. And you told me when we were talking before about how you handled the financial issues and how you were socking away money. You want to share some of those stories?
Yeah. So I was on, like, this is a man, I would say, I don't have any gas in my car. And he would say, where are you going today? And I would be like, well, I need to go to Trader Joe's. I need to go to the dry cleaner or whatever. Here's $3. That should be enough gas. I mean, he didn't let me go anywhere. He found out one time when I was
very controlling behavior, which is also a hallmark of domestic violence. A lot of people think that when we talk about domestic violence or intimate partner abuse, we're just talking about physical violence, but the whole mental control and emotional stress and emotional violence. And you mentioned earlier gaslighting. So we'll talk about what that is for people who don't know. All of that is part of this whole constellation, as well as the whole contrition part afterwards and coming back and saying, I love you and apologizing and I'm so sorry. And
saying everything you want to hear. And they know it.
Right.
Yeah.
So tell us about the money.
So the money, he was very controlling with that. He owned his own business, so I didn't know where any of the income was. I didn't know how much we had in the bank. I was never allowed access to a checking account, nothing. He gave me a deposit-only ATM card, so I could make the bank deposits for him into the business, but I had no access to the money. So with the grocery money and what I was given, I would literally squirrel it away in weird places. You take like a mason jar and you put the toilet paper roll center in there, and you can shove up about, $2,000 worth of $100 bills in there. And then around the toilet paper roll, you put beans or rice or whatever around it, put the lid on it, put it up in the cupboard. So I had money stashed like that.
I feel like this is some kind of Martha Stewart arts and crafts project recommendation for abused spouses for how to hide money. And of course, the reason you had to hide money is because you had no bank account. Mm-hmm. And because you told me he was routinely searching through all of your possessions.
So I would fold it into his old t-shirts because he would go through my things. Like he went and found my yearbooks from high school and cut out any boy that had ever written anything into my yearbook. Like he just sliced my yearbooks all to pieces. So he was going through my stuff, but it never occurred to him that I'm smarter than him. And so I would hide it in his belongings.
Now, it never occurred to you to go open up your own bank account?
I just was afraid somehow we would find out about it, like in the tax returns or, you're so afraid of them in so many ways that you're not always being rational in your thinking. At one point, I did have a lot of money in a bank account in Arizona. Mm-hmm. Connor was born in 97. The second baby came in 2000. So it was probably 2001. I had a bank account in Arizona.
Why Arizona?
I have family friends out there, so I went out there quite a bit. I didn't spend a lot of time with him. I would either go to my sister's house in Salt Lake. I would take off. I didn't have a problem being gone 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And for whatever reason, he allowed it. He didn't give me money to go. I remember going to Salt Lake one time in an old junky Honda, like a really old Honda, and he'd given me a roll of quarters to cross the Mojave Desert with my baby. Mm. And when I got home, my brother-in-law, I've told this story many times, but my brother-in-law literally wanted to kill him. Mm. Like, you don't put your wife and a baby in a car across the desert, like in that kind of a car, in that kind of condition with
a roll of quarters. So it sounds like, and unlike many domestic violence victims who don't tell anybody, it sounds like you had a support group that you reached out to. You reached out to the church elders. Did you talk to your sister and her husband or your mother or any family members?
I thought I did, but when I was on Taboo Tales and people listened to my story, my family said we didn't know. And my one nephew, he said, "Oh, Aunt Chris, I remember that time you had the roll of quarters." Like he remembers his dad flipping out about that. So, yeah, I don't think I really complained that much about it because I wasn't willing to leave, and my mom complained about her husband so much. but all she did was complain and complain, and she'd never do anything. And so I just remember thinking, like, stop complaining or get out. I can't listen to you complain every day. And I wasn't willing to get out, so I probably didn't say too much about it.
So was your mother still married at that time?
Technically, I think she was, but I don't believe that they were together. She's since passed, and I don't know where he is. I think he ended up living in Washington State or something. But once I left, well, I moved to New York when I was 21 to get away from them.
Mm-hmm.
I went as far away as I could.
And then you went back.
And then I went back to California. I never went back to Salt Lake.
Okay.
To live. Yeah.
So one of the things you talked about that is also very common with people who live in a domestic violence situation is this pervasive, constant fear. And everything you're doing is out of fear that something you do might trigger an outburst or trigger violence or trigger the house being destroyed. Did he ever do any kind of abuse to your dog? Because that's also actually a common thing.
Kind of in that sense, I think it was only ever directed at me. He was really great with the animals. He was really good with the boys. His big thing was he would leave $20 on the counter and say he's going fishing for a week. He would, and I believe that he really was fishing. I mean, to this day, I really believe he was fishing.
You don't think he was having an affair?
I don't, and I don't care, and I didn't care then, as long as he wasn't home. I remember driving down the street. I still live in the same house. This is my house that I bought. And I just remember like driving down the street and seeing his work truck in the middle of the day in the driveway, and I would literally vomit. I would pull over and throw up coming down the street because I can't deal with him. So we did spend a lot of time away, which is odd. And for some reason that never made him upset. Long as I didn't ask for money, he really didn't seem to care.
Mm-hmm. And so how did you leave?
So when I was leaving, when Connor
was the tipping point also that, because first, before you actually leave, you have to make a decision to leave.
Well, I had made a decision when Connor was 3 months old and he went to jail that I would stay till Connor was 2 and then I was out. Okay. So Connor was 2. I'd lined up a place to live. I had a job. I was leaving in like 10 days. Exit strategy was in place. I woke up puking and sick and found out, oh, I'm pregnant again. No. Yeah. I literally laid on the bathroom floor with the door locked for 3 hours, just sobbing because I just felt like everything was coming apart at the seams. And, he was being really nice. Like, what's going on? Why are you so upset? And I couldn't believe I had gotten myself into this situation again. And that, now looking back, of course, he's the joy of my life. My younger son is so sweet. I wouldn't trade those days for anything. But when you're looking, and I just remember thinking, I can't out earn 2 kids in daycare. Right. Now I have to stay till he goes to 1st grade when he's in school all day, and then I can go, and then maybe I can survive. I'm sure I could have figured something out. I could have, left the house, declared bankruptcy, gone on I could have done something sooner. I'm just real stubborn that way. And I don't know if it's me or if it's everybody, but you don't think it's as bad as it is. And I look back now and go, I should have got out before the youngest was in 1st grade. The older one was in 3rd grade. And the real big tipping point for me at that point was not only was that my goal and that was my time, but I realized staying was teaching my boys this behavior. And that's when I drew the line and said, I'm out.
So he was never directly abusive to the boys, but they witnessed him being abusive to you.
They witnessed that. Plus they witnessed like just his unwillingness to, go support when they were, a student of the week and they got a real special day at school. He wouldn't support any of that. His family's kind of weird. They've never been to a school play. They've never seen my kids. They live in my town. We see them at the grocery store. They've never had my kids overnight. They've never done anything with them. They've never celebrated anything for them. It's just been a bizarre
relationship
trip around the whole thing is really, really twisted in my opinion, but.
So you talked about getting pregnant the first time because you didn't think you could get pregnant because of the PCOS diagnosis and a doctor mistakenly telling you that. Um, but what happened the second time? Did you still have this belief system that you weren't going to get pregnant again, or were you using some kind of contraception?
No,
Or
because I'd had a TIA at 21, so I couldn't take the pill. That was not on the table for me.
So TIA, for people who don't know, is a transient ischemic attack, which is like a mini stroke. So that would be a contraindication for the typical birth control pill. But there are many other contraceptive options, including a progesterone-only pill, which would be okay for somebody who
to this day, I don't know that. I mean, I've got my tubes tied now. It doesn't matter, but
isn't that a wonderful relief?
Menopause is a beautiful thing as well.
So for people who don't know about having your tubes tied, 25% of all women of reproductive age choose tubal ligation after they've had their children as a form of contraception. For people who then go on to get divorced and are redating again, obviously it doesn't help you prevent sexually transmitted infections. But there are still many other contraceptive options. You could have had an IUD, you could have used a diaphragm, obviously probably not condoms.
Yeah, I think that's what we were doing, to be honest with you. I remember that more than anything else, because I personally would never have done an IUD. I just it's not a choice for me. But so, yeah, and that came up in Taboo Tales, I think, when I was doing the podcast interview, and she's like, I don't understand. And I said, well, if you've never been in that kind of a situation, you don't understand why you're still having sex. Because she was like, why are you sleeping with him? And it's like, it's so much easier to allow certain behaviors like that to kind of keep everything on an even keel.
Right, to pacify the situation. And I was gonna ask you whether he ever forced you into having sex.
Yeah, there's a couple of times things were pretty dark. I remember one time after the stint in Utah and coming back, and it was before we lived out in this area, so I know exactly the time frame. It was the first year we were married, and for some reason, like, it was a rental. It was a really nice big house. It was on a half-acre lot, but the walk-in closet had a deadbolt on the inside, like a safe room. And I remember going in there and locking myself in there and like freaking out. And of course,
because
the gaslighting physically. He was like, I wasn't doing anything. You're making this up. You're crazy. You were engaging in, I mean, just like making you feel like everything you've thought or that you're feeling or experiencing is absolute insanity.
Yeah. So for people who don't know, the term gaslighting actually comes from a movie where the protagonist or the perpetrator was trying to make his wife feel like she was insane and she was crazy. And this is a really common psychological tool of psychological warfare where somebody will do things, whether it's just something simple like hiding the salt. Or you put something down and turn around and then it's missing, or it's in another room, or things are
more verbal gaslighting. Like he would say things or agree to things, and then a week later, it got to the point where I'd say, okay, I'm going to write this down. Will you initial that you just said that right now? And he's like, no, wait, what? So I finally got to the point where I would be like, okay, let's write this down. You just said that right now, right? And he would be like, I'm not putting that on paper. So then I was really totally clued in that he was doing that. He was
doing it on purpose.
And then later on being like, I never said that. We never had that conversation. And you're like, I know because why would I think in my head it was okay for me to do something?
So this is very classic manipulative behavior. So with the situation where you felt physically threatened and you felt like you were being forced into having sex and you ran into this closet and locked yourself in, how does that kind of a situation resolve? At some point you have to come out. And obviously you did come out. And
yeah, after a couple of hours, and then what happens is they know they've been abusive. So now the cycle starts over. Now they're being nice. They're being apologetic. They're saying everything through the door to get you to open the door. You open the door. They're like, I don't know why you're so upset. Nothing.
Then the gaslighting.
Yeah. And then, and you're done crying and you're exhausted and you just want to go to bed. And that's how a lot of it ends, is just at night. You just want it to stop. So you go to bed, you have sex, they calm down, they fall asleep, and you sneak off and do whatever you want to do, or just try and get some decent sleep. But it's crazy when I look back on it now. I just cannot believe I survived all that. And for 10 years. And
right. So then you waited till your son till the youngest was in first grade.
School started on Thursday. I left on Friday.
Okay. So you had your exit plan.
Huh?
You had your exit plan. You had did you have a job lined up at that point?
I was in real estate off and on around that time. And I think I had started back at the hospital part-time.
And at the hospital, you were working as a doula, childbirth educator at that point? Or
at that point, I was over at community. So I was doing breastfeeding rounds. I was seeing patients every day. And then I was teaching in the afternoons or evenings. So it was part-time. I had saved up some money and paid rent for 6 months or something.
For 6 months in advance?
Yeah. So I knew I was like safe for a certain amount of time.
Right.
And I didn't want to disturb the house because he wouldn't leave, so I had to leave. And I went and bought all new furniture. I bought sofas, lamps, kitchen table and chairs, silverware. Like, I bought everything because I didn't want the kids' home to be disturbed. That's how concerned I was.
And you took the kids with you, or you left the kids?
I took the kids with me. Oh, no.
Okay. And then how did he react when he came home and you were gone? Did you leave a note? Did you say where you were going? Did you say, don't follow me?
I think I told him that morning or something. I remember being in the bedroom and just saying, by the way, I've got an apartment. I'm moving out today. When you get home tonight, I'll be gone. And he's like,
you weren't worried about a violent episode in that scenario?
I really wasn't. His violence was more around my pregnancies. He was violent when I was pregnant with both the boys. But outside of that, he wasn't even like a shover. He really only had a few episodes where he was physically violent. His shining star of torture is emotional and psychological.
And financial.
But he
and the episode when you felt so threatened you had to lock yourself in the closet before you were pregnant.
It was the time that he went to jail, because I remember being in this house and we got into it and I stuck my chin out. He had his fist down by his side, but it was doubled up and I saw it and I stuck my chin out and I was like, go ahead. And he was like, you would love that. You would love to put me back in jail. And those are his words. Like, if you asked him to this day, he'll say the day I had him thrown in jail. Not
the day that he did anything deserve. And from what you told us, you were begging the police not to take him.
Right.
And because of this law and because of the marks on your body, they, didn't give you that option. It was then their decision that he had to cool off for 3 days in jail. Yeah. Did you ever at any point have an order of protection after you left?
Oh, gosh. I think he filed one on me, to be honest.
Okay. How does that work?
I can't, gosh, it's been so many years now. I'm trying to remember all the details, because this was back in like 98. 20 years.
Yeah, almost.
It's our wedding anniversary. Isn't that crazy? I just looked at the calendar. So he filed against me because he said I filed false charges and he was put in jail and he didn't trust that I wouldn't call 911. So he got it all twisted up and I thought, well, then he can't come over either. There's a protection. So I never filed one on him.
But did that work? Did he actually get an order of protection? Even though
I think he did, but he never served me, if I remember correctly. So it was never in order. And then I moved into a gated place just down the street here because he would show up over there at the other apartment. Like, I would come home and he would be like, I had this little Corolla that had a sunroof, and he'd be standing over my sunroof, like out of nowhere. And he would be on my front porch. And he wasn't violent, but he was intimidating at that point. Because
I probably should have asked you this question first before we started this discussion, before we even got online. Are you worried about any kind of retribution from this discussion or from your having done the taboo tales?
I'm not. I'm sure he will have his side or his version to, put out there if he decides to. He lives in Florida. He's remarried. He's got a new target. They've gotten divorced and remarried or broken up. I mean, like, she's living in her own hell. I think he's too preoccupied probably with keeping her on the line.
Did you ever meet her? Did you ever have a conversation with her?
I would love to have a conversation with her because I know what she's going through and I know he's gaslighting her. And they got in a fight one night at their house here in California, and they were upstairs, and her grown son lived with them. He told me this story. And the grown son had said, I don't know what's going on up there, but obviously he was being physical probably, or at least yelling at her, and the son had had enough. So she sold the house, and he was kind of homeless for a while. He had his own apartment and was living with friends. He's kind of unstable financially, and he always has been. And that's why he marries women like me and her that work in hospitals or nurses or somebody that can pull the weight. And then last I heard, I saw him, he was here at the house to do something with the kids, and he had his wedding ring on. I said, I thought you got divorced. He's like, I never said I was getting divorced. I'm like, oh, we're still having these conversations? Okay. And now they're off in Florida somewhere. So
And he has a relationship with the children that you have together?
Yeah. He hasn't seen them. He hasn't seen them in years. He hasn't taken them. My younger son is going for spring break for the first time to see him.
Oh, wow.
3 or 4 days. Not decided if I'm going to fly with him.
He's in college now, or he's in high school, or?
He's a senior. He's 6'4" himself and can carry his own. He's a great kid. So
That's awesome. So have you ever been in a situation either as a doula or childbirth educator or lactation coach where a patient has, or somebody in a professional situation has confided in you personally about being in a domestic violence situation?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And how do you handle that?
The first thing I tell everyone is get into a support group. That is the biggest thing you can do for yourself. And just sit and listen. And because I sat and listened to these stories of these women, even though I didn't really put domestic violence hat on myself at that point, and I'm listening to these stories, these women they've been kicked downstairs, they've had their jaws broken and wired shut. And so in my mind, I was kind of thinking like, that's not my situation at all. But then you listen to the other side of it, which was all my side, right? The financial, and I can't get out, and he's got all the, whatever.
Well, you had physical abuse. You just were lucky that you didn't have any bones broken.
Yes.
Yes. And that, is just a factor of your bone density, how hard you were hit or where you were hit, or, how you hid your injuries. Obviously, in the situation where he was arrested, your injuries were apparent, even though it wasn't a fracture.
That was very apparent.
So again, what I hear you doing, which is so common in situations, and also, obviously I grew up with this as a kid.
Right.
So the only way I think I can talk about it is as a healthcare professional, because it's so much easier to switch into that side of my brain to talk about it than to talk about it from, the personal, intimate, emotional side. And, I was in a similar situation that you were with your mother and her next husband, where I physically did get between the two of them and pulled a knife on my father when I was 12 years old and said, "You will never touch me again, or I will kill you." And then I went on to become a doctor. So, and people don't believe those kind of stories.
It's hard to get your head around.
Well, and it's also, I think, hard for, when I've only told a couple of people in my whole life that story. And I think it's very hard to look at somebody like you now you're gorgeous and you're successful and you're so positive and happy and you're radiating, just joy and happiness. And it's hard to look at somebody like that and say, you know, okay, this person has a really dark past.
Right.
I also want to clarify something you alluded to at the beginning about the statistics about people's backgrounds and how that influences them going forward. All kinds of research has shown that only 30% of children who grew up in abusive homes grow up to be abusive, which means, and 30% is a lot when we're talking about 15 million children.
Right.
And that, of course, perpetrates the cycle. But that means 70% do not. I don't know what percentage of those people are like me, who go on to become overachievers and go on, you know, to become doctors, or like yourself, who go on to be, you know, in really helping professions, because you do want to take your experience and help others.
Right.
You know, even when Dr. Ben Carson wrote his book and talked about an incident where he was, you know, in a violent situation and he pulled a knife on somebody, everybody reacted with just mocking that story. Nobody makes up a story like that. No. And even though he went on to become whatever you think of him as a politician, and I don't think of much of him as a politician, he was a brilliant surgeon.
Oh yeah,
absolutely,
for sure.
Brilliant surgeon. And to come from that kind of background and that kind of a situation can also be very motivating, because you want to prove that you're better than that.
Yeah.
And that you can overcome those situations. But I don't want you to ever minimize the violence or the impact of the physical violence, because that's a real thing. It's nice to put it in the back and say, okay, well, it wasn't so bad. Or in my case, I just thought that was normal.
Right.
You know,
Right. Yeah, I remember being pregnant with my first son and being in the rental house and going through some of the darkest days. And I just remember I laid in bed literally for 4 days and bawled hysterical, because all I wanted to do, I really wanted to die. I just wanted to die, and I couldn't do anything about it because of this beautiful baby.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's some really bad times.
Yeah. And that's okay. Take a minute. What I always say about crying is crying does not mean you're weak. Crying sometimes means
not at all.
It means that you've been strong for too long. And it's hard. And you had a horrifying decision to make. I do have to ask you, because of course, victims of domestic violence have a much higher suicide rate. Did you ever think, you said you wanted to die, did you ever think of doing anything to make that happen?
Not once I was ever pregnant, no. There was plenty of times before from other stuff that's happened in my life that, yeah, I did absolutely have plans and whatnot. But once I had that, you know, pregnancy test turned positive with my older son, never. I mean, I thought about, like, it would be nice, but that's not a choice for me anymore. That's like me saying it'd be nice to have a baby. It's just not a choice for me anymore either. But yeah, I mean, I think in those types of situations, you think like, I would like everything to just end. Like, probably not so much suicide as just like, if I'm on a plane and it goes down, it wouldn't be the worst. Like, that might be okay.
You want it to be over.
Yeah, you want to be over, and you don't want to have to be the one to make all the decisions. And the day he went to jail, my family got involved and just said, you're coming home. Like, I didn't make that decision either. I just got on a plane. It was, all those decisions were made. And that's kind of the only time you really feel like,
yeah, I do want to give a shout out to all of the police officers and other first responders who do help people in this situation. And I also want to point out to them, one of the challenges, even with being a doctor, you know, you don't always know what happened next. If you don't see the patient, or the patient goes to a different doctor, or say you're working in the emergency room, there's so many patients I took care of in my past where I say, I just always wondered what happened. Yeah. So I want to send a message, particularly to police officers, to let them know and to kind of underscore what happens, even with a law like this Nicole Brown Simpson law, where he went to jail for 3 days. Those 3 days gave you the time and the space. My mother finally left my father after 30 years of abuse because he finally was arrested And in his case, he was only in jail for 24 hours. But that 24 hours gave her the time. We were also in a situation where I was already a doctor. My sister was 18, and my father went to jail because he hit my sister over the head with a chair. And so she was able to press charges. So it was no longer up to my mother.
Right.
And maybe she was 17, but she was old enough, like these incredible students that we're seeing from Parkland. I'm so impressed and amazed by their strength and their activity. But that's what I saw in my sister. And my sister, by the way, went on to become an attorney. And she, worked at one point in the sex crimes division, the DA's office in New York. Yeah. And she ate nails for breakfast. But that was how she worked through. And she has 3 children and is an amazing, amazing mother. So, I look at that and I look at all of my siblings have all gone on to be, overachievers in our various fields. But that's what it took. 24 hours of my father being out of the house and my mother not having to worry that he would come home.
It's that little window where you feel absolutely safe.
Right. And I was able to come home with a car and say, you're out of here. And my sister found an apartment and we just up and moved her out. And we said, we've had enough. And I remember even saying to my mother, like, how can I take care of my patients? What kind of credibility do I have if I can't even take care of my own mother? And her experience has been very much like yours. It was tough at the beginning, and she worked her tushy off. Right. Fortunately, she did have a job and a career. She was a high school teacher for 30 years. Interestingly, also in one of the most violent high schools in the United States, as judged by this school where I also went, had the highest murder rate in the country in the 1970s. With this whole discussion of gun violence, I'm telling everybody who will listen, in the 1970s, my school had metal detectors that we all had to walk through this building. This is not a new thing. Right. The new thing is that now these kids have access to assault weapons. In those days, the worst kind of gun they would have access to would be a handgun. Yeah. And mostly in those days, it was knives. And knives still kill people, but not that many people in 3 minutes. But I digressed yet again.
I just wanted to say too that getting out, as hard as it was for me, like to get my brain around the fact that like I'm going to do this and it's the best thing for I got out for my children, and staying is never an option. Like staying for your children is not an option. That's the worst option you could possibly offer your children. They're better off in 2 separate happy homes than one really horrendous situation. Also, they need to know it's so much easier to be a single mom than it is to be a mom inside of a marriage like that, where I can't express enough how much easier it is to be a single mom.
Yeah, you were in a good situation, though, in terms of the fact that he had never been abusive to the kids.
Yes.
That is not a typical situation. In a typical situation, as in my situation, my father was physically abusive to my mother and equally as physically abusive to all of us. And one of the issues for mothers in that situation is the fear of being killed. I gave the statistics at the top of this segment about the very high numbers of domestic intimate violence victims, mostly women, who are actually killed. But part of the control is that fear that he will hunt you down and he will kill you. Yeah. And that's another issue in terms of this whole gun violence issue. Right. When they have access to a firearm, the chances that he actually will kill you actually go up. And what they often do, and the reason I asked you about his relationship with the pets, it often starts with abusing the pets in front of the children, abusing the pets in front of the wife. and saying, this is what I will do to you, as he, beats the crap out of the dog.
I can't imagine.
That is so stressful. And then, when you have multiple siblings and the children are being abused, one of the strategies is they say, this is for you. You did this, so now I'm beating the shit out of your brother because of what you did. Yeah. And what you did might have been to roll your eyes the wrong way.
Right.
Or to not get 100 on a test, or something that didn't even happen, or something that was totally
right. My younger son has this habit of going, and I'm like, what's wrong? He's like, what? Like, he doesn't even know he does it. So I can imagine like little triggers like
if I had ever done that to my father, I would have been beaten into oblivion.
See,
and that's not even an exaggeration. Not even an exaggeration. So in many cases, mothers in those situations don't leave because of the very legitimate fear. Right. And often he will say, and my father repeatedly said, I will kill you. And he used to say, I will kill you, the kids, and your parents. Now, when she finally left him, only one of my siblings was under 18. And he did threaten to kidnap my younger brother and take him to, quote unquote, to Egypt, where fathers owned their children. And that was a very, very scary situation. And there was a court case, and there was, a judge involved, and, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare.
Yeah, having younger kids would be really scary because there's so much, and I know friends that have been through this, and they've just gone the rounds with like the custody and trying to prove things. And until once kids are 13, they can testify in court of what they want and where they want to go.
Right, and he was 13 at the time. He was exactly 13.
13 is kind of the number.
And he was tall. And he had 5 older siblings who all testified. Yeah, one of whom was a physician. Yeah. And I was on the stand myself for 3 whole days. Wow. And we're not talking about the Donald and Ivana divorce here. My parents had no assets other than their house, which was not worth very much at all. I don't know how my father even was paying this attorney that he had. And it was a woman, and I will never forget her, and I will never forgive her. I wish I knew her name so I could say it publicly right now. There's this common phrase now where people are saying there's a special place in hell but there is really a special place in hell for women attorneys who represent abusers like that. Because she grilled me for 3 days and questioned everything I said and challenged me and taunted me. And basically said, well, if you were so abused, how were you a champion swimmer? And if you were so abused, how did you go to Princeton? And how did you go to medical school? And it was just infuriating. And it was like being abused all over again. From, this person who didn't even know me.
Right.
And in the midst of that, we took a break one day in the midst of the court case. And I went out to get lunch. And I saw my father coming towards me on the street in Brooklyn, New York. And I was so afraid, even as an adult. I just went up to this random, very large man who was walking the other direction. And I just put my arm through his arm. And he was shocked. Right. And I said, please don't react. Please just pretend like you know me. And please keep walking. And he was so awesome. He was just... And he could have been, another attacker or whatever, but he was a total stranger and he was totally awesome. And he said to me, okay, who is following you and where do you need to go?
Right.
And he walked me, back to the courthouse, and he stayed with me until, they opened the courtroom and, the judge came back.
Yeah, you felt safe.
So it's very, and even years later when I had my own children, I was always afraid that he would come back and try to have a relationship with my kids. So I always spoke to the school and said, under no circumstances does anybody have permission to say,
right,
that, they're picking up my kid because I can't get there. That was always my biggest fear. But this fear, I digressed again. The point I was making is this issue of fear of being killed, or fear of your children being killed or hurt. Especially when that's been done in front of you and you've been told
this is because of you, and this is because of what you've done. And that other, that whole other emotional component is, I think, why women don't leave. And I belabor the point for two reasons. One, in case anybody is listening who is currently in this situation.
Right.
And I respect greatly your advice to women to get into a support group as the first step. My advice to women as the first step is to leave. And I think what you did and how you framed it as having an exit strategy is brilliant. Now, you had a really long exit strategy. I would encourage women.
Way too long. I don't suggest that for anyone, because now there's so many places I look now that
that's what's different.
I could have taken the kids. I could have gotten out. I could have been protected. I could have, like, they protect your address now. Mm-hmm. Like, you have so much more protection today than any other time in history as a woman to get out of this type of situation, because women are dying at an alarming rate by people they love. And it's unfortunately, it's so common now that we have so much better protection because it is so common.
Well, and it's got a term. When I was a kid, there was no such term as domestic violence. There was no such thing as a domestic violence hotline. Right. There were shelters for homeless people, but there weren't specific shelters for, abused and battered women. Right. And I understand now that this issue with pets has become such an issue that there are some shelters that are allowing women to not only bring their children, but to bring their pets as well, because many people don't leave because they don't want to leave their poor dog.
I know that sounds crazy, but the dog we had when my kids were little, Max, I had that golden retriever for like 5 years. Like, that was my first, he slept with me. Mm-hmm. We walked 3 times a day. Like, he was like, the kids' dad, when we were dating, said, "I don't let dogs in my house." I said, "Then I'm not dating you." Mm-hmm. And so, like, that
should have been your first red flag.
It was actually, yeah. You don't like dogs? Okay, that's it. I'm not. Yeah, but I just, like, I get it. When you're really attached to a pet like that, like, it's
a member of your family.
It is.
Independent. Yeah. It really is. So I think the message I would give to women who are in this situation: reach out to someone. And if you have the unfortunate circumstance that you did, where you reached out to the elders in the church, that's just of all people, you think that, people in your church would be able to help you and shelter you and give you sanctuary. But don't take no for an answer. If the person you reach out to doesn't help you, go to somebody else. Contact a domestic violence hotline,
right?
Or go to a hospital. Talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Go to your local police station. I
mean, there's call me, right? Mm-hmm. I'm here. You can find me anywhere on the internet. But I think the most important thing is really kind of verbalizing that you're struggling, or that something's going on, like letting someone know, mm-hmm. and getting that feedback. That's why I did really enjoy the support group, because even though I had a hard time admitting that was happening, once I did, that made all the difference.
Well, I also would encourage anybody who's in this situation, or who has been in the past, to listen to your Taboo Tales.
Yes.
And that's under your maiden name, Chris Hansen.
Yeah, it's Chris Hansen in the Shuffled playlist on Taboo Tales.
It was one of the most poignant stories, and it was funny. And that was what your real talent was, is that you took a really super difficult, dark, emotional story, and you made it also funny.
Right. Well, those two women, Loren Sala and Corey Purdell, are just amazing. They call themselves vulnerability coaches.
Well, they were awesome.
They help you craft these stories. And so when I was crafting my story was going to be about, why does everyone keep asking me why I'm not married? And then I fell in love. And they said, wait, why are you so adamant about not getting married? And the tears.
Which of course you did this before you were remarried. And you said you were never, ever going to get remarried.
The Taboo Tale was after I had been married 3 or 4 years.
Oh, okay. So you told it from the perspective of...
So I told it backwards, And they said, well, why are you crying so much when we ask you why you'll never get married? And I'm like, oh, it's a terrible story. I'm not talking about that. And they said, oh, that's definitely what you're going to talk about. So they did a great job.
That's awesome. So in order that we can end this on a positive, happy note, let's talk about babies, and let's talk about what you're doing now.
Oh my God, I have the best job in the world. I can't even tell you. So
yes, you can, and you will.
Okay, I will. So I work with families that are like in the last little bit of pregnancy, transitioning to life with baby, and everyone has these ideas about what it's going to be, and we're going to be such a cute little family. Me and my husband have a joke, like we see pregnant people and we go, it will be so fun, and we go, yeah, it's going to be so fun, and we totally laugh because it's not fun. It's long. And
we tell ourselves it's fun because otherwise we would never have another child.
Oh, you would, because the rewards are too big, but the work is definitely hard. Dads get put on the back burner, sex is out the window, you're bleeding, your boobs are leaking, everything feels like it's falling apart. And, you know, it's kind of like when I got pregnant, you know, you see these catalogs and these beautiful pregnant women. I got pregnant, I'm like, I'm a cow. Like, I look like I'm a wreck. My thighs are, you know, this big around. And I was so disillusioned about what to expect. So I really helped bring harmony to the family, maybe help dads get a little action, help moms fold laundry and deal with the fact that if it's folded, the towels are folded in the closet, it doesn't matter how they're folded. So I let them, they need to let go of some control issues and just how to make it much more fun and enjoy the baby and not worry so much about, oh my God, my friends are coming over and I haven't dusted. You know, you're not going to dust for 10 years. Don't worry about it. Like I finally dusted. My youngest is 17 and that's finally dusted.
So tell me about your project, your video project that you're doing.
My video
and how people can watch this.
So it's consulting with Krishelle, and
Krishelle is with a K for everybody who doesn't know. K-R-I-S-H.
K-R-I-S, hell. I'm a visual learner. So I'm doing this project to help women because when I see families one-on-one, I can help one family at a time. So I got thinking if I can pull all these experts together and we can have some great discussions about postpartum depression and breastfeeding and, you know, all these topics, and then I can do this show, I can help so many more people at one time versus just my consulting company. So the show's going to launch in about 2 weeks. There'll be 2 episodes a week. The show will come out every Monday and Thursday, and they'll run for 4 days. And then we'll have another one on, and that'll run for 4. And so it'll be fresh, and the content is very big and fun, kind of like this. Like we talk about a lot of serious topics.
Well, it'll be a lot like this because I'm thrilled to be one of your guests.
Right.
So that's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll be much more serious and professional and talk about babies. Although I love talking about, you know, my 2 experiences of birth and
it's all life. Life's messy and it's a lot of fun at the same time.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that we'll close with, when I was pregnant with my second child, I was so worried. You worry about such different things. My first pregnancy, I was all worried about, was he going to be healthy and was everything going to be fine? And
the
you know,
delivery.
And I had a very complicated pregnancy the first time. The second pregnancy, all I could think about is how on earth am I going to love another person as much as I love my first child? And I was really, really stressed out about that because I just could not imagine how that was going to happen. And I randomly read a quote in a book that just changed everything for me. And it's still one of my favorite quotes. And I apologize to the woman who wrote this because I don't remember her name. But she said, our first child teaches us the depth of love. Our second child teaches us the breadth of love. And I just thought that was, you know, so profound. So I want to leave everybody thinking about that. Fortunately, that woman and I did not have a third child. So I don't know what the third child, I think the third child teaches you don't get blood on my carpet. But tell everybody again where they can find you, your website, and how they can.
So the website is Consulting with Krishelle, Krishelle. And my blog is the Chris Hansen, KRISHANSEN.com. If you Google me, it all pops up pretty easily. Some other websites will be coming. They'll all be posted through Consulting with Krishelle. So if they find me there and sign up, they'll get the TV shows delivered right to their inbox when they go live.
Awesome. So thank you so much. I know this was a very, very difficult topic. I hope all of your other interviews are much easier and much more fun, but it's not always joy and happiness in the ladies' room, but we always like everybody to leave with joy and happiness.
Yes.
Thanks again. Take care.
Absolutely.
That's all we have time for today. But let's keep the conversation going on Twitter or Facebook at Dr. Donica. And please join us next week for another episode of In the Ladies' Room with Dr. Donica. Real conversations with real women about really intimate topics.